Today I'm going to be talking about just dissecting the hands, and I'm just going to go through this really quickly conceptually, and then I'm going to show you video for the rest of the video, but I just want you to be on the same page with me right here. So what we found when dissecting the hands is that, everyone is unique, but we definitely find themes. There's something called paved patterns, and paved patterns were things that I saw enough in the sample and enough in working with players in a wide range of games to say that, like, all right, there's some value here if you pay attention to this by itself. But the reality is we are really looking for the routine. We're looking for the sequence in which a player bets or approaches their actions at the table that's going to reveal how they're thinking about a specific category of hand or how they think about a specific spot, right? So, for example, some of the paved patterns are things called the card apex. This is how long a player takes to check their cards or how long they look at their whole cards. Cavalier movements where they just like bet and they sort of have like a why not gesture to him, like, yeah, I'll call you. Double checking players when players double check their cards, when players put a chip on their cards. This is probably interesting. When a player put a chip on their card, I have never seen ever a player who puts a chip on their cards as a card protector and it not be a tell. And it's not the fact that they're putting a chip on their cards, it's how they do it and the order that they do it in. And I'll show you an example of this in a little bit. And then while all those things are valuable, and when I show you them, there's this propensity to be like, oh, the apex thing, that's so usable. Let me look for that. Or, oh, double checking your cards. Like that sounds rational. Like, let me look at that. But that's not really like beyond tells. That's like, I don't know, basic tells in my opinion. What it is to be beyond tells is to be able to understand a player's routine and their execution style and how that connects to how they're thinking about a spot or a hand. So for example, like we found that some player, you watch a player play in a distribution, and sometimes the way they check their cards and immediately what they do after, it's direct and it's intentional. So it's sort of translating to like, I know what to do with this hand. And in a lot of player populations, you'll find that, for the most part, when a player checks their hands, they're intentional. They're either folding or potentially they're like top of range. And then you have like casual and cavalier where it's like, player checks their cards, they look at the player around, like, yeah, sure, I could play this hand in this lineup. Like, why not? And they marginally toss out a bet. And then you've got all these like cool exception things where it's like, I analyze a player and they check their cards and they look at the player that just opened before them. And they're just kind of like, all right, like this hand's probably normally not playable, but against this guy in this spot in position, blah, 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 like I'm definitely raising. And you see that. So you're basically seeing how a player approaches or thinks about the game. You're seeing it translated into behavior. That's the trick. It's not just like, oh, look for this one little tip. And it drives me nuts because like I talk about it a lot and there's just still this propensity to just like hyper focus on the easy things, and you're really missing the forest for the trees. So it's about unlocking that moment. And what I'm going to do first is I'm going to take you through some video right now. I just pulled some random video. I'm going to talk over it so that we can see here. Okay, so let's take a look at some video to make this clearer. So here, she puts a chip on her cards, crosses her arms. Again, chip on her cards, crosses her arms. Now, the act of putting a chip on their cards isn't necessarily an indication of anything, but every time I see people put a chip on their cards, it's like, oh, they're going to be great to pay attention to for tells and because the reason why is there's this sequence or a routine behind what they're doing that we can find deviations or patterns in. So if we look at this, we can see there's a lot of ways that she does this. So on the upper left hand, she sort of like drops it. One, she places it. One, she presses it. There's a different speed. There's a different tempo. There's a different way she puts a chip on her cards. And what we can find here is I want you to watch these two video clips to notice the difference in string or routine or sequence that she's going to actually do. So on the left-hand side, she checks her cards. A little bit of a delayed apex, waits, and makes a bet. And now she checks them again and puts a chip on her cards. Right? So that's her routine. And now in the right hand, you're going to see her. She checks her cards, quickly puts them over the RFID, already is reaching with her other hand, makes the bet, and now puts a chip on her cards and crosses her hands. So if you look at that just from the action of putting a chip on her cards, you would say, oh, that it makes sense. But like she always does it. These are two wildly different routines that are connected to do different types of thought process. So on the left-hand side, she happens to have Queen Jack. On the right-hand side, she happens to have King. She's a lot more direct. She's a lot more fluid on the right-hand side. So this is what it looks like from a behavioral, like a metric perspective. This is basically a visualization of every action she took along with the timeline of time, essentially. And what we find here is Queen Jack, which she probably perceives to be a marginal hand in that dynamic, versus King, which King she perceives to be strong, obviously. You see a denser collection of the behaviors, right? So you see a card check, card placement, bet execution, hand on cards, chip on card, cross arms. It's very condensed. It's very fluid because she knows exactly what to do with it, right? Where on the other hand, with the Queen Jack, we see a card check, a card place, a bet execution. Then she checks her cards again. Then she puts a chip on her cards. Then she crosses her hands. So with this specific player, just by paying attention to the hand, and I do this, like you can reverse engineer what she has a large percentage of the time based on these strings. And the reason why I pulled this as an example also is because in this specific example, it's pretty consistent. So if players have like a lot of behaviors in between checking their cards and executing, you'll find that when they know what to do with the hand, which is usually top of range for the most part, a lot of it goes away and it's more condensed. So this is the kind of thing that we're paying attention to. We're not paying attention to, just the fact that she checked her cards twice. Like that's useful, but it's the story that the behavior is telling, and then it's the patterns that that story starts to fit into. And then let me show you another example here. So this is an example of like apex. So the average card check, remember I told you how long it takes for people to look at their cards, watching the left-hand side, takes a look and drops it, right? On the right-hand side, takes a look, holds it, and then executes. So if you look at the timing of this, left is 2 seconds, right is 3.8 seconds. And what we found is for a lot of players that have variability in their apex, for the most part, players are going to spend a longer time looking at hands that they perceive to be marginal. And it is very logical, right? Like you look down, you see aces, you don't really need to think that much. You look down, you see 2-9, you don't really need to think that much. You look down and you're in a weird spot against an opponent with, and this is going to vary, some people will perceive a hand like King Queen to be marginal. Other players, they'll know exactly what to do in that spot. But the point is, it's not reverse engineering what hand they have. It's reverse engineering their thought process or sentiment around the hand. So in a certain way, the apex is a manifestation of hesitation. They're taking a look at their cards and it's kind of like, what should I do with this? This is this reason why I brought this example up is because I've given out a lot of free training over the years. And for some strange reason, this is the single most commented on behavior. So like I'll be at a game or whatever and people are like, oh, like that apex thing is so useful. And I always like it. I'm always like, yeah, I really appreciate that. Like I'm glad you found it useful, but I want you to see the bigger picture. I want you to see how the behavior is connected to actual thought process and thinking.